I am here. It's Tai Lopez with Mr. Daniel Lieberman, Professor Lieberman. Thanks joining us from Cambridge. Good old Harvard alumni. Did you go to Harvard?
I did indeed.
Cool. So we're talking about one of my favorite books, and a book that I think, more importantly than being my favorite, I think it's an important book. It's called The Story of the Human Body, Evolution, Health, and Disease. It's been listed for about the last year on my top 150. Thanks for coming.
Oh, I'm honored to be here. Thanks so much for asking to talk to me.
Yeah, there's so much. I mean, I like to just dive in right to the good part at the beginning, eat the dessert first. So the takeaway that I got, I always try to get one golden nugget from a book, and the nugget I guess that I got is that there's this map to our body that's almost, you could say, predestined throughout evolution, and it's in our DNA. And most of the health problems that we have come from not a lack of willpower, not a lack of, it's not just one thing, it's not just sugar or just one thing, it's not following that overall map, whether it's how we move, how we sit, how we eat, how we choose. Does that sound like a fair synopsis? It's probably not the most scientific, but in layman's terms.
Well, I think I would amend that very slightly. I think the point is that our bodies weren't designed. They evolved, and they evolved for all kinds of different reasons and all kinds of different functions. Only one of which is to be healthy, and we have to understand. An evolutionary perspective helps us understand why our bodies are the way they are, but it also helps explain why sometimes things go wrong and why we get sick and why we're doing such a poor job of preventing ourselves from becoming sick. And that's really that was the focus of the book, really. I wanted to try to understand, how an evolutionary perspective helps us do a better job of not only understanding our bodies but also staying healthy.
There's a quote you said in the book: "We didn't evolve to be healthy, but instead we were selected to have as many offspring as possible under diverse, challenging conditions. As a consequence, we never evolved to make rational choices about what to eat or how to exercise in conditions of abundance and comfort." That's kind of what you were just saying.
Exactly. I think it's one of the. It's sometimes that statement. The idea that we didn't evolve to be healthy really causes some people to be a little startled and alarmed, because we have this assumption that somehow if we only just did as our genes told us to do, we would be healthy. That's really the idea behind the paleo diet, for example. If we just eat like our ancestors, we won't get sick. And the fact of the matter is that's not true, because our ancestors also got sick.
Right.
And they didn't evolve, to be healthy. They evolved to have as many offspring as possible, and sometimes health helps you do that, but not always.
Right. So returning to quote-unquote nature isn't always the answer, because returning to nature is not always in your individual self-interest. It might be in the interest of your great-grandchildren, but it might not be in your best interest.
Yeah. And natural selection doesn't really have any interest. It just happens. The relative number of offspring that you or I have affects which of our genes get passed on, and if some of our genes have an influence on how many offspring go from one generation to the next, then that's natural selection. It just happens. There's no intent. There's no purpose. There's no design. It just happens inexorably, like gravity and anything else.
That's not a message people love to hear, at least not in the U.S. Probably not most of the planet.
No, it's a disturbing message. It's actually one of the reasons that Darwin was so hesitant to publish The Origin of Species, because that's really the most, if anything, the most disturbing aspect of the theory of natural selection. That evolutionary change requires no agency; it just happens.
So one of the practical things that I took away from the book, you said, there's a quote where you go, There's nearly universal consensus that we should prohibit selling and serving alcohol to minors because wine, beer, and spirits can be addictive and when used to excess, ruinous for their health. Is excess sugar any different? So that's another... You're going from one controversial conversation to another here.
Yeah, well...
You might have a contract on your head from some food companies.
Well, you should have seen. I wrote an op-ed for the New York Times about the Bloomberg sugar ban, the big gulp ban, and I got quite a lot of. You should have seen my inbox after that. But the thing is that we are asked today to make all kinds of choices we never evolved to make.
Right.
And when you have an escalator next to a stairway, I mean, who doesn't know that they should take the stairway, right? But it's a natural desire. It's a natural instinct to hop on the escalator because it makes your life easier, and most of us do that. In fact, about 96%, 97% of humans will take the escalator rather than the stairway when they're offered a choice. And the same is true of sugary things. I mean, I'm no different. When I go to a restaurant and they put that dessert in front of me, I can't resist it. My every instinct, every impulse, my fast brain tells me to go for it, and we all need help acting in our own best self-interest sometimes, and that means that we need to help each other, and that's really a political question.
Right. That brings the whole philosophy of who then do you remove escalators? Do you remove Coca-Cola from elementary schools? And I like the point, though, we're already doing it on some things like alcohol. And alcohol, in some ways, it might be less deadly than sugar. I mean, not that you would want to have alcohol in schools, but a little bit of wine. In France, they give that to their 12-year-olds. A lot better to have that than to have Snickers and, Coca-Cola all day.
Right. I mean, I think the issue is not that, obviously I'm not a dictatorial person, and I don't believe that we should prevent people from having dessert or sugar or for that matter, alcohol. And if people want to smoke, go ahead, they should do that. I'm not, but the problem is that, some of these things, some of these aspects of our environment, we're very ill-equipped to self-regulate, particularly children. And so if an adult wants to smoke or, guzzle down vast amounts of sugary beverage, who am I to stop them? But a child can't really make rational decisions in the same way. And I think in that case we have I think there's an ethical as well as a moral argument to be made for us to do what we can't in any other regard.
And you could argue ethically, since we have somewhat Obama universal health care, that I don't want to have to support even an adult that drinks big gulps all day and then goes and drives up health care. But we won't go into that. This talk, I tend to stay away from politics and religion. Let me ask you, one of my favorite parts of the book was your talk or your pages on sleep. So basically what I took away, and correct me if I'm wrong here, is that we didn't necessarily evolve. Well, clearly we didn't evolve to sleep like we sleep now, where we have lights. I lived at the Amish when I was younger for 2.5 years. So the Amish go to bed. The best I've ever felt in life is there was an Amish couple. They were 90 years old, and they stuck. I ended up staying with them for a month, and they went to bed at 7 p.m. exactly when the sun went down, and got up at about 3:45. And I've never just experienced your eyes just open. There's no grogginess. You wake up, you match the circadian rhythm, and that's broken, obviously. But the other thing you talked about is one phase where you just try to do a straight 8 hours of sleeping without ever sleeping again. And you talked about things like how our ancestors napped and things like that. Can you talk a little on what you found kind of in your research and what you wrote about that?
Yeah, I mean, sleep today is one of the strangest things about our lives. Even though we do so much of it, we don't do it in a way that's very natural. As you mentioned, not many people nap anymore, but napping is actually used to be probably a human universal. Everybody napped. In addition, if you watch television, and late at night, you'll see all these advertisements for, medications for insomnia. And the idea is that if you wake up in the middle of the night, somehow something's wrong with you. Well, actually, it's perfectly normal to wake up in the middle of the night and, just go back to sleep again. But we now live in this world where we've been told that's somehow pathological. And I think the hardest part is that we have now this vicious cycle where we get very stressed because of our lives. We commute, our jobs. I mean, who knows what makes us stressed? That elevates cortisol and various other hormones of stress. That harms our sleep, which then in turn makes us more stressed and prevents us from sleeping. So we get caught in this vicious cycle. And then finally, we evolved to sleep on hard mattresses, not even on mattresses, and just hard, maybe just a piece of fur on the floor, in kind of a jumble with all the noises around us and in basically camp conditions.
Right.
And now we go to sleep in these dark, quiet rooms, and we've got these super, efficient blinds to make sure there's no light that gets in, and we can make the room super quiet. And that may also affect how we sleep, because the initial stages of sleep, your brain is actually semi-conscious, and it's monitoring the world out there, and it may be that we have ancient adaptations that actually, to listen for those sounds, the hyenas in the distance, the lions, etc., to let you know that you can go into a deep sleep as opposed to not so deep a sleep. And then, of course, finally, we have lights and television and laptops and bed and all kinds of things that just prevent us from sleeping as much as we used to. And add it all up, and we're pretty screwed up in terms of sleep. We don't get enough, and it's not very good quality.
Do you think, so going back to this line of thinking of that the old way isn't necessarily the better way, so we have to find, paleo isn't necessarily better just because our ancestors ate all meat. Could we, and so obviously that would apply to sleep, we got to pick and choose. Do you think that the science matches up? Have you found research that says, yes, it's health is correlated somehow with sleeping with a little bit of noise, maybe some white noise machine, and maybe being okay with waking up, only sleeping 6 hours straight, and then going out and doing some work and then taking an hour nap later? Have you seen some modern studies? Have you guys done anything at Harvard or kind of?
Well, I'm not myself a sleep researcher, but I think that the literature on sleep that takes an evolutionary perspective, I think, is really a long way to go. And I think, so to answer to your questions, I don't really know of any. I've never heard of any data which suggests that anything other than what's really important is just getting enough sleep.
Right. Total cumulative hours.
The majority of sleep researchers are concerned with this sort of how stress interferes with sleep, and then how lack of sleep then causes stress. But to be honest, what I think that the biggest concern really I have is that so often when people have sleep disorders, rather than treating the root cause of the disorder,
right,
which is usually stress, we tend to try to find ways to treat the symptom or treat it at a superficial level. And sure, there are people who have serious sleep disorders sometimes, and that's a serious condition. But the vast majority of people who have sleep disorders, it's because they're stressed.
Right. It's kind of like depression. A lot of people are depressed because that's a signal from their brain that their life is not on, the proper track. So then you go and take medications and cover it up instead of just going, okay, well, maybe I'm depressed because I hate my job, I hate my wife, or I hate my blah, blah, blah. Now,
exactly, or I'm not getting enough exercise, and the list goes long. It's very long, and we just as a society, we're just very, very bad about dealing with the symptoms versus the causes of problems, and we typically so often we go right for the symptom and get ourselves caught in this positive feedback loop.
I wonder if it's because my theory on why we take the easy route. I was reading a book. Her name, I think she's a professor at Columbia, or her name's Halverson. She's written a whole bunch of books, and she says we basically are cognitive misers. And from an evolutionary standpoint, I'm pretty good friends with Dr. David Buss. I don't know if he's written a lot on evolutionary psychology. There's a adaptive reason why we don't think things through. It's because it takes a lot of glucose and takes energy to do deep thinking, and it didn't make sense to use a lot of glucose on logic when we lived on the African savanna, eons ago. So we basically take the easy route out. So if there's an escalator versus a stairs, which one burns up more energy? Obviously the stairs, so we don't do it. If there's two choices, which one being, think through something deeply and take the path that might have a lot of upfront pain, like not eating sugar, we tend to eat sugar. If you go to the gym, you're not going to go to the gym. And do you think we will find a solution for that? Because almost everything that you need to do has upfront, I call it investor mentality. Very few people are investors. Warren Buffett started at 7 and was able to go on a slow track, slow and steady, accumulate a lot of money, not spend it on the things that most people were spending it on. But the vast majority of people, they're not going to do that. They're going to spend the money when they get it. And the U.S. savings rate is at 2%. So you see it whether it's in health, you see it in wealth, you see it with relationships, dating websites. My friend just sold his dating website to Match.com for $550 million, plenty of fish. But dating websites create the same thing where now people are inundated with choices that they didn't have. So people get paralyzed by the abundance of choice. Happiness, the same thing. So do you think there'll ever be, in the conclusion of this book, where do you see the light at the end of the tunnel in the modern world where we get past our addiction to covering up the symptoms versus the root causes?
Well, man, that's a heavy question.
I threw it right at you. I told you we do the hard stuff first.
It's a good question. I think that, you've put your finger on it. Part of it is understanding what the root symptom is, and I agree. We too often cave into our instincts rather than thinking things through. We use our fast brains rather than our slow brains, whatever analogy you want to use. And I think that we need, as a society, at a political level, at a sort of social level, beyond just the individual level, have to come up with some agreements about how we can help each other act in our own self-best interest. Because almost everybody knows that they should save more and spend less, right?
Right.
Doesn't know that. Almost everybody knows that we should try to prevent disease rather than simply treat disease once it occurs. But we're very, very challenged because of our biology at doing that. When you put the cake and the apple in front of somebody, almost everybody's going to go for the cake, not the apple. So that's where we need help helping each other. And I kind of like that general philosophy of sort of libertarian paternalism. I don't think we should take away people's choices, but give them choices in a way that helps them do what they'd actually want to do. Help them step back, give them a little extra time to think, nudge them with taxes, whatever, so that they do what they want to do without taking away their choices. And I think that's where, as a society, we need to go. Preserve individual liberty and preserve freedom, but also help us make the right decisions. Look, I'm in my building where my office is. I'm on the 5th floor of the building, and they're tall floors. It's an old Victorian building, and every time I walk into the building, I want to take the elevator. I promise you. I'm no different from any other person on the planet, and I've forced myself to take the stairs often, not because I want to take the stairs, but if I've harassed enough people about taking the stairs that if I were to take the elevator, I'd be called a hypocrite.
Right.
And so I've actually coerced myself through my social actions into taking the stairs on a regular basis. When I go running, right, I love to run, but often one of the ways I manage to get my running up is to I have a running partner, and we email each other the night before and say we're going to meet at 6 in the morning to go running. And I guarantee you, almost every single morning we go running. I do not want to be out there at 6 in the morning, but if I don't go, I'll leave my friend stranded.
Right.
To go, and so we coerce each other. We need to find ways to help each other, help ourselves in ways that benefit us all, and that's a larger social issue. But its roots lie in understanding why we are the way we are, and of course that comes from an evolutionary perspective.
Yeah, the way, Charlie Munger, the billionaire, he says that the human brain operates on, he's isolated, in his experience, about 25 cognitive biases that cause us to misjudge situations. And he says the dominant one is reward and pain. So what you're basically saying is you're doing a friendly hijack of your own brain using reward or pain. So you're going, if I take the stairs, I've set myself up to look like a hypocrite, which will bring me social pain. And I got to hang out with Arnold Schwarzenegger last month, and what he did when he was young, he was really strong on his upper body, and he had weak lower body, and he couldn't motivate. Most of us want to work on our strengths and not our weaknesses, but he wore really baggy shirts, so you couldn't see his muscles on his upper body. So he hid his strengths, and then he highlighted he wore shorts so people could see his little chicken legs. And he said that he didn't want the pain of being embarrassed. So he said it didn't take me long of self-exposing myself to that pain that I started getting on the gym and just working on my legs. So I like that coercion type. In our office, maybe this is the paternalistic libertarianism you're talking about. I'm slowly but surely taking away desks and replacing them with treadmill desks where people can walk at very low speeds, 0.4 miles, but in a day, that's 3 or 4 miles. And I've found if you have no desk, you go on the treadmill. But if you have a treadmill and a desk, you spend a lot of time at the desk. So sometimes you just got to take the options away. It's like junk food in your house. I've found you cannot have junk food at your house. It literally can never enter into your house or you'll eat it.
Oh, exactly. And I think, a lot of shoppers know they eat lunch before you go shopping, and you make fewer you buy fewer comfort foods and cravings, because it's hungry. I mean, I think some people learn these skills, and we need to help each other learn those skills. And also, we should use other social means too, like taxes, right? We tax the hell out of cigarettes and alcohol. Why don't we tax the hell out of sugary beverages, which are poisonous? They're in large doses. They're okay occasionally, but nobody should drink soda on a regular basis. It should be a treat, and that's going to require taxing. I can't think of any other solution to that.
Yeah.
We're not going to remove soda. That wouldn't be right either.
Right. Well, it wouldn't be. It'd be like the prohibition. You try to remove alcohol or soda, they're just going to be selling it. They're going to be Al Capone's going to be back.
Tub soda, exactly.
Now, one interesting thing in the book. Also, speaking of the treadmill desks and walking, can you go over a little bit how we're different at our knees and our hips from apes? You talk about that, I think, in the book. And is your conclusion that walking is one of those big things that people are built to do?
I think the thing that
or
evolved
to
do. One thing that really
do.
sets us apart from an evolutionary perspective from our ancestors is being bipedal. And initially that was walking. Apes can walk a little bit, and we have all sorts of adaptations to be walkers. But even more importantly, from my perspective, is that we became athletes, endurance athletes, and also added running. So your typical chimpanzee walks 2 to 3 kilometers a day. So that's 1.5 to 2 miles a day. That's all they do. Gorillas walk even less. Gorillas just basically sit in a giant salad bowl and eat the vegetation around them. A hunter-gatherer in Africa, which is where we all used to be a few hundred generations ago, a typical hunter-gatherer walks, 5 to 10 miles every single day. Every single day. There are no holidays. There's no, there's no Sabbath or weekend or retirement or whatever. That's what everybody did every day, and they also had to run and throw and climb and dig. They had to use their bodies as athletes because that's how they got dinner. That's how they survived. And so we have, our bodies have all kinds of features, adaptations that we evolved that make us extremely good at walking and running and doing these various tasks. But also, interestingly, if you remove walking and vigorous exercise from our physiology, we don't develop properly. We don't develop proper bones and proper muscles and proper brains and proper cardiovascular systems because we require the demand that comes from all that walking and running in order to develop appropriate capacity.
Now, how do you think it is with now when we run, we're often running on concrete. So it's like some of it's natural, and then we throw ourselves in these unnatural environments, which kind of tweak the whole algorithm, you could say, because now you get the one step forward progress-wise and one step backwards. Obviously, if you can run at the park or run at the beach, you kind of avoid that. But do you see? I mean, there's all these.
There are challenges when you run on pavement or sidewalk. It's like a treadmill. Every step is the same as the other, and so you're more likely to get repetitive stress injuries, I think.
Right.
Injuries from trail running are much lower than injuries from pavement running, and that people also run differently when they're wearing shoes and when they're barefoot, because the shoe also cushions you, so you don't really know what you're doing. I'm not saying that you should necessarily run barefoot, but because I think what matters is how you run, not what's on your feet. But yeah, we've changed our environment in a multitude of ways that affect how we use our bodies and how our bodies are get injured and develop. So pavement is just one of them. Shoes are another. The air conditioning in my building is changing my thermoregulation. I mean, there's so many things that we do, many of them which make us more comfortable, but since when is comfort necessarily good for you?
Right. Now, do you teach this as a class? Do you have a class called The Story of the Human Body, or?
Well, I teach a class called Human Evolution and Human Health,
okay,
which is more or less somewhat like the book, and then I also teach a basic course in anatomy and physiology, how our bodies work.
So, based on, you've got an incredible amount of experience and knowledge, and for yourself practically, one of the big, if you go into Barnes & Noble, by far, the most dominant category of books is on health and diets.
Yeah.
What is your kind of high level, without, not teaching your whole class, take on practical things we should be doing diet-wise, besides obviously the obvious that, the government tells us we should, USDA says don't have too much sugar and eat are there any nuances that you found in your research that kind of enlighten you as you live your life diet-wise?
Well, I think what's sort of fascinating is how many completely contrasting diets there are out there that claim to be healthy. How is it possible that an Atkins diet or a paleo diet, which is basically a high-fat diet, low-carb diet, how can that be healthy when also a vegan or vegetarian diet is also healthy?
Right.
Now that's confusing to most people, and I think the answer to that is that we didn't evolve to eat any one diet. We're actually we're adapted to actually eating a wide range of things, and we can actually thrive on different kinds of diets. But the one thing that none of us can thrive on is heavily processed food with lots of sugar and very little fiber.
Right.
I think if there's any one thing that that unites all good diets is that they have a minimal amount of processed food, a minimum amount of food that's high in simple carbohydrates like starch and sugar, and lack fiber. And if you can just that's why eating healthy, lots of vegetables and fruits is healthy. That's why not eating too much junk food is healthy. That's why you should avoid soda and fruit juices, which are basically just sugar and water.
Yeah, even fruit juice, because there's this big fruit bar kind of push in the world, and it's like just have lots of fresh squeezed orange juice, but that still is something that's sugar.
Have the orange. Have the orange, because the orange has fiber in it.
Right.
Yeah, there's some vitamins in the juice. But what you really want is all that stuff with the fiber. The average American today gets only a few pounds of fiber a year in his or her diet. The average hunter-gatherer got like 40 pounds a year.
Wow.
Even the U.S. RDA is ridiculously fiber-free compared to the diet that we evolved to eat. Now, let's go back to that statement I made. We didn't evolve to be healthy, and having as much fiber as hunter-gatherers had might not be ideal either, but there's no question that the extreme that we've gone towards with no fiber is massively unhealthy, because what happens is, for example, if you have juice without fiber, right, if you just have juice, all the sugar in that juice more or less rushes straight into your bloodstream, and you get a spike in blood sugar level. If you eat the apple instead of drink the apple juice, or eat the orange instead of drink the orange juice, the fiber in the fruit slows the rate at which that sugar gets into your bloodstream, and your liver and your pancreas can handle the rate and dose at a much more leisurely pace, and you don't go through these big swings of sugar and insulin, and your liver doesn't go into shock and turn all that. I mean, most of us have what we call fatty liver syndrome. We turning all the fructose, the sugar in our fruit, into or the high fructose corn syrup into fat in our livers, which then cause us to have lots of belly fat and inflammation and diabetes and heart disease and all kinds of horrible, nasty things. Adding fiber to all that just completely changes the equation.
Yeah, I just read an interesting book about it's written by, I forget his name right now, but he's a head of a Mayo Clinic in Arizona, and he pioneers these treadmill desks and talking about when you eat things that have a lot of sugar, how you get this tremendous spike. And one of the things in their research, anti-diabetes research, was moving right after you eat. So even a 15-minute leisurely walk immediately after eating cut the time it took you to lower your blood sugar by about half. So you got your blood sugar right down by just move, and that's going back to this kind of hunter-gatherers walked and they moved, and it wasn't eating and then just watching TV. Because now what you get, it's like a triple whammy. You have people sitting, which we're not evolved. Would you say anatomically, have you done any research on the actual sitting type position? Because we didn't have chairs in the savannah.
Yeah, we're actually really fascinated with it. I think that the big issue about sitting is it tightens your hip flexors, which has a lot of interesting implications, but it also makes your backs weak. And weak backs, we think, are a major contributor to lower back pain. So chairs are also, chairs are comfortable, but they're also not necessarily good for us in excess.
What happens when you tighten your hip flexors? What are some of the results?
Oh, well, you end up shifting the orientation of your pelvis, and then you have to, and then you end up having shift the orientation of your back, and then you get like back pain. So tight hip flexors actually alter your posture, and can lead to sort of imbalances that are, that many physical therapists think are contributors to lower back pain.
What about supplements? Any thoughts on your take on supplements beyond maybe just a multivitamin? Do you see things in your research where people are taking fatty acids, they're taking cod liver oil, they're taking higher protein dosages? You see coffee. There's all kinds.
It's a huge industry, yeah. And I'm not I don't have strong opinions on that. Apart from that, I mean, certainly there are supplements that you can take that are probably healthy, and a lot that are probably completely unhealthy, and nobody even knows what they do. My recommendation is just eat a healthy diet. You don't need to do any of that. If you eat lots of, fresh vegetables and fruit, which granted is not is expensive and not everybody can afford to do anymore, and try to eat, healthy meats that aren't, corn-fed meats, which have lower nutrition than grass-fed meats, and try not to eat too much, processed food. You're already 9/10 of the way there. So,
right.
Again,
And move, and a lot of movement. What do you think about germs? You talked a little bit about this. We used to be exposed to a lot more germs, and now we're washing our hands with antibacterial. Sure, there's definitely been upsides of increasing sanitation, or without a doubt. We don't have typhus anymore and cholera. But do you think we've started to take it too far?
There's no question there's been a trade-off. So the question is, have we taken it too far, or is this an inevitable trade-off? And that's a tough question to answer. But our immune systems are clearly adapted for much less sterile conditions than we experience. I mean, I'll make a bet you probably don't have any worms, parasites in your gut, and you probably think that's normal. But actually, from an evolutionary perspective, that's abnormal, and and that may alter your, for example, probability of developing an autoimmune disease or an allergy.
You mean because we don't have parasites that might?
Because our immune system just is going to start still doing what it's supposed to do, but now it doesn't have anything to do anymore. So the analogy I use is sometimes like a teenager hanging around on a street corner, and it's got something to do with all that energy in it. Instead of using it for some positive purpose, it ends up making a mistake and doing something inappropriate, like attacking your own cells in your body.
So like lupus or analogy or things like that.
Yeah, or peanuts are somehow bad for you, rather when of course they're not. So we, what we don't understand is to what extent we can, have the best of both worlds. How much can we continue to sanitize our environment and decrease the chances of diarrhea and other kinds of nasty infections there's no question that we're much better off for all the sanitation we have today. But there's no question also that we are beginning to pay a price for that. And maybe there's a happy medium, or maybe we can start using an evolutionary perspective to start treating some of these diseases. The poster child for this is C. difficile. It's a bacterium that causes this horrible inflammation of the bowels and can kill people. And actually, there's a 90% cure rate by giving people fecal transplants. So if you can, because your gut has trillions of microorganisms that normally live there, and we often kill them with antibiotics. And sometimes that causes us to have a very abnormal gut microbiome, the microbes in our guts. And by restoring that microbiome, we can actually cure ourselves from some really, really terrible diseases.
Now, when you say fecal transplant, are you saying taking someone else's feces and putting it in your own body?
Oh, people do that already. Actually, it's the number one treatment now for certain intestinal disorders, and extremely effective.
Huh. That's fascinating. All right, as we kind of wrap up here, two closing questions for you. I just saw this movie with Ben Kingsley, and it's about life extension and all the places we're going. It brings up the ethical questions of picking your children to not have genetic defects and all this. And what did you see? Let's specifically talk on life extension. Dr. David Buss and Richard Dawkins, they talk about things, ESS, evolutionarily stable strategies, meaning everything has a trade-off, like you said. We wash our hands more, but then we mess up the biome in our bodies. We take antibiotics so we don't die of a cut, but there's this trade-off. We get this other ailment. So this ESS is kind of like Aristotle, to be angry is easy, but to be angry at the right time, at the right person, for the right reason, that's difficult. So it's that balance that's hard. We know we're already going towards some level of life extension just by having antibiotics, and most of our healthcare costs is people living 5 years longer in old folks' homes and all this. But do you see light at the end of the tunnel for us using evolutionary understandings of our body and being able to find the balance and really live longer and healthier without too many trade-offs? Or do you think it's always like this? We're just going to be having sugar and going on the escalator, not the stairs? Well, I think that that's a great question, and I don't know the answer, but because it's too complicated a question. But we evolved to senesce, to grow old and to die. That's actually an evolutionary stable strategy. And sometimes the way in which we fight that or ignore that causes more misery than not. I think that my goal is that I'd like to add more life to my years than years to my life. Although I wouldn't mind both, right? And one of the things that's happened because of the various mismatch diseases that we suffer from now is that we've got what's called an extension of morbidity. Morbidity is illness, not mortality, and the data show pretty clearly that as people have gotten to live longer, more of those years they're infirm. They've got chronic diseases, diabetes, osteoporosis, heart disease, etc., that not only cost us a lot, but also cause enormous amount of misery. But what evolutionary biology tells us is that by developing our bodies
better, and by using our bodies more as they're adapted, we can decrease that period of morbidity prior to our mortality, and have a compression of morbidity, and along with an extension of life. I'll give you an example. We know that every medical textbook says that it's natural and normal for blood pressure to go up with age.
Okay.
When you're young, you have low blood pressure, and as you get older, your arteries harden and you become hypertensive. Well, actually, that's not true. There are plenty of studies from non-Western populations that don't live the kinds of lifestyles that we do, which show that when people live into their 70s and 80s, their blood pressure is no different from when they were in their 20s. And that's because of diet and exercise. These are not, they don't have heart disease. They don't have osteoporosis. They don't have diabetes. They have other problems. They're not, there's no Shangri-La out there. Or
Right, they lose their teeth or something like that.
They lose their teeth. There are all kinds of problems. They get pneumonia. They get infectious diseases. But we've just sort of swapped one set of diseases for another set of diseases, and in so doing, by changing our lives, also increased our morbidity, and that doesn't have to happen that way. And I think by paying attention to evolutionary biology, we can do a better job of not only extending life, but also increasing the quality of that life.
All right, last question. Pretend today, hypothetically, is your last day on planet Earth. You've got time to leave one little 30-second or 60-second piece of advice you'd want to leave with your family, your kids, humanity. The one bang for the buck, somewhat practical, somewhat philosophical piece of advice. What would it be? Off the top of your head, obviously.
Oh, my gosh. Can I have two instead of one?
Sure.
I would say, don't eat sugar and get plenty of exercise. That's it.
I like that. That's short. That was like 7 seconds.
I mean, it doesn't guarantee you perfect health, but the absence of those choices, right? Eating too much sugar and refined food and not getting enough exercise more or less guarantees you ill health at some point.
Now, sugar, I was reading, there's different thresholds. I've seen 25 grams of sugar ideally a day. I've seen 25 grams in addition to fruit. So if you have a lot of fruit, might spike up. Have you seen any do you follow any practical guidelines? It's probably pretty tough to go to zero sugar just because, everything has some level of sugar. Is there a threshold you've seen in your research that, like my friend says, eat protein that's about the size of your hand, have about that much meat per plate? That's his little threshold. Do you have kind of a threshold?
No, I mean, there's no such thing as a threshold. I mean, everything's on a dose-response curve, and there are trade-offs to everything, and sugar's one of them. I mean, I'm a runner, right? I love to run a lot, and sometimes I need carbohydrates in order to run. Otherwise, I'm not going to be able to make it, right? So everything has trade-offs, and I think we all know when we're having too much sugar. We all know that chocolate. I had chocolate cake for dessert last night. We went, and I probably shouldn't have had it, but it looked good and it tasted great. Now, I'm not going to remove all pleasure from my life, but I try to be, moderate about it, and
It's like
I'm not into coming up with numbers for this sort of thing. We just need to exercise caution and moderation and relax. Too many people get stressed out and make everything a health decision. Should I have coffee in the morning? Is that a health decision? I mean, I just like coffee, and sometimes we should do things because we like them, but just be mindful of the trade-offs that they provide. And
my mom used to say, "It's not what you eat."
People go mad.
Yeah, my mom used to say, it's not what you eat or do 10% of the time that kills you. It's what you do 90%. So optimize for the majority of your diet, and then it'll be like the Supreme Court. They were asked, one of the Supreme Court justices, they were saying, well, if we outlaw this kind of art, then, what is porn? Then we'll be outlawing everything. And she said, well, the definition of porn is you'll know it when you see it. So kind of the definition of too much sugar is you probably know if you're having too much sugar. One little bonus thing that I forgot here, or a bonus for me to hear your opinion, and then we'll wrap up. I read this book, Inheritance, by Dr. Sharon Molam, and talked to him on the phone, and he basically says what he sees the future also, and it's not quite here yet because DNA testing isn't quite good enough. I did my DNA test and found out my ethnicity on 23andMe, but they don't quite know how to apply it to diet. But he thinks that in the future, it'll basically be you'll swab your saliva, they'll decode your DNA, and they'll be like, this person's a little better as a vegetarian, this person's a little better. So it's a customized diet approach. Do you see something like that making sense? Just because, like you said, not everybody. Some people seem to do better on vegetarian, and some people don't.
I think that maybe to a small extent, but if you were to, exterminate all the world except for Australia or Lithuania or take your pick of some population, you'd still have 86% of all the genetic variants that exist on the planet. We're all basically the same. And furthermore, when you look at the genetic basis for diseases, most of the complex diseases that we care about that are going to kill us, like heart disease and cancer or whatever, what makes you more likely to get the disease, genes that you can identify, are not going to be the same that makes me or the person in the room next door. Most of the genes that are explain these diseases are very rare. There are many of them, and we all have different combinations of them, and most of them explain very little of the variants, which is one of the reasons why we're never going to find any blockbuster drugs for most of these diseases. The fact of the matter is that most of us are pretty much basically the same. You can marry anybody on the planet and have healthy offspring with them. I don't think that this kind of high-tech solution based on genetics and is really going to solve some of the problems that we really care about now. What we really should do is, your mother was right, and most of our mothers knew exactly what we should be doing. It's not that difficult. Our problem is, again, not so much scientific; it's really political.
Right.
How do we help our kids? How do we help our kids eat healthy diets? We all know what a healthy diet is. You don't need me to tell you. We all know that exercise is important. I mean, you don't need me to tell you that. But why is it that our kids are sedentary and eat too much sugar and there's no physical education in school and 50% of the vegetables eaten by American children are French fries and the list goes on. Those are political issues,
right?
And I think rather than genotyping everybody and hoping that's going to solve it, we really need to work on the root cause of the problem, which is that a lot of people are out there making a lot of money on exploiting our instincts, our cravings for comfort and sugar and fat, and we're letting them get away with it.
Yeah, and I think I would add to that media. The media has power over what people see. It has power over young people, what they want to aspire to be. So media and private enterprise, like you said, I hope there'll be media. We're working on that as part of this effort we call the Knowledge Society, where you really push things that make sense for people. Everything doesn't have to be lowest common denominator food, doesn't have to be lowest common denominator TV, and those things influence us too. So I would add that to politics, private enterprise, and media.
I don't disagree at all. I completely agree.
Well, awesome. So everybody listening in, go out. It's a great book, The Story of the Human Body, Evolution, Health, and Disease. Daniel Lieberman, thanks so much for being here, and I hope to meet you one time in person.
It would be my pleasure. Thank you so much.
All right. Thanks a lot.
Take care.
All right, Maya, I'm going to hand you over here to Maya. But thanks. Yeah, I'll take you off speaker here.
Sure. Thanks so much.
Yeah. Well, are you ever out in California?
Yeah, I do come out occasionally. I have to go often to San Francisco because I'm on the board of the Leakey Foundation. And
Oh, really?
I end up in L.A. every once in a while, but I was actually just out there a few months ago collecting data on some runners, but didn't know that you were trying to interview me, so sorry we missed that.
Yeah, well, maybe we'll do a follow-up. I'm sure people will like this one, and I'm going to do a conference here. I'm not sure when, probably next year, but if if you're ever open to being a speaker, I'm sure people would love to hear you, and Maya will kind of keep you in the loop if you're ever available.
Sometimes, I mean, it's a crazy schedule, and I can't do a lot of the invitations that I get, but I try.
Awesome.
Writing 40-page
All right.
paper. So.
Here's Maya, and thanks so much again. I appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thank you.
All right.